Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Greg Labanov. I'm the CTO for OHDSI Data Services. I'm really excited to be here today again. And every time it's a new crowd, some new faces, and it's really exciting to have you all right here. So I'm going to talk about Arachne. So, if you know Patrick, you know that Patrick likes to give out challenges. So he gave me one an hour ago. He basically told me that I have to present Arachne to you in only 15 minutes. That's all I've got. So I'll do my best to do a good job. So basically, Arachne is actually quite simple to explain. Instead of a very typical process that people follow today when they bring data to the research, Arachne is trying to do the opposite. It's trying to bring research, business questions to the data and get results back. So I spent quite a bit of time in pharma myself, and pharma likes to build big data lakes and big data warehouses, right? So people buy lots of data. They buy data from Truva, Optum, IQVIA, anywhere, and they build those very large data warehouses and then running local studies all the time. Imagine the world where you don't have to do big data lakes anymore. Imagine the world where every data set that exists in different HR systems exists at different data aggregators is actually just linked through a single network. And going back to your question, imagine the world where you can send a question to the data set and obviously going through an approval process. You would run a query and get an aggregated results back to you. So obviously I think it's a win-win to everybody, for regulators, for pharma companies, for healthcare institutions. Imagine that you would be able to design a study, run a study on your local data set and say, hey, what does this what does this study look like on somebody else's data, and just simply with a click of a button send this question to a different collaborator, for example, Columbia University, and get a result back. Imagine that you designing clinical trials and you have a cohort of patients and you want to see who's got patients like that would fit your specific cohort. Again, click on the button, send this query to multiple organizations and get results back, and here we go. You know exactly where those patients exist. So that's the idea behind Arachne, is to enable essentially we call it federated, distributed, collaborative research between organizations. So the idea behind Arachne right from the beginning, because we're building an OHDSI ecosystem, is to be able to take anything that you can do with different other tools with an OHDSI, import it into Arachne, and execute it across the network. So that was the idea from the ground up, one of the requirements. So we also build in some other key features into Arachne, things like data catalogs, because as Patrick said, share at least metadata about your data, tell people what you have available so that people can decide whether they want to run a study across against your data set or not. And from the beginning, obviously, when you're exposing an ability to run remote questions against data sets that might be sitting in some data sets that are coming from HR systems, you have to make sure that it's secure and compliant with different regulations that exist in different types of countries and industries. And of course, support for OHDSI standards was at the heart of the product itself. So if you go to Arachne UI, and I'll show it to you in a second, you will see that you'll have a portfolio of studies that you as a researcher have access to or leading yourself. You have an ability to see who else is in the network, so you can find collaborators. You see, you have an ability to go to a data catalog and see what data, data nodes we call them, exist in the network. And also at the end of the study, you should be able to click a button and maybe annotate some of the study results and publish it into what we call an insights library. Sounds very familiar. It is exactly what people do today in OHDSI. It's what we do. We're not inventing a process. We're just automating the process, making it easier for people to collaborate and run those studies. And as you can see on the right side from you, there's an image of a data catalog. So we, again, really try to take advantage of OHDSI as being an open source community and reused as much code as possible. So what you see on the right side is Achilles reports embedded into the data catalog that we enabled in Arachne. So if you go to a study, as I mentioned before, workbook, you'll be able to see all of the studies that you have access to as a as a researcher, as a collaborator. And within the network study, we organize it slightly differently from what's you would see typically today in Atlas. So Atlas, in our view, is a fantastic tool where you can design analysis, and of course, when you start talking about patient-level predictions and population-level effect estimations, those are actually more complicated types of studies. So in our kind of lingo, when I say study, I mean a collection of different analyses that you as a study team would like to execute so that you can produce an evidence. So it might be a number of cohorts that you would like to run and get some counts. It could be maybe some incident race analysis that you would like to run. It could be even more complex PLP and PLE studies, as well as maybe some even custom code. So at the end of the day, this as a collection of different analysis would make up a single study. And the process, of course, is always iterative. So that's the fact of how people work. So you run a study, you analyze results, you maybe make some adjustments to study design, and then you run it again. So today we support all types of study/analysis that you saw in Atlas. Of course, there's always an intention to support the latest and greatest, but as you can imagine, whatever we put into Atlas is a little bit ahead of the latest version of Arachne, so that we play and catch up sometimes. So in the data source, in the study itself, you'll be able to see a list of data sources or data sets that are available to you as a researcher to run remote questions again. And again, when you think about Arachne, you always need to keep in mind those data sets are not on premises in your organizations. Those data sets sit elsewhere. So of course, to be able to gain access to this data set, you need to send a request to that external organization, and then a data set owner would receive this request, and they would be able to accept or reject an invitation to contribute this data set into a study and also become one of the collaborators. So that's also something that we mounted into our process. But as soon as you've gotten approval, then this data set becomes available to you to use in that study, and the data set owners also become a part of a study as a study collaborator. So again, I kind of mentioned before, so today Arachne supports every single type of analysis that you saw, at least in the previous version of Atlas 2.5. We still have to work on making that slightly refactored to support the latest and greatest innovations that were literally released today. So, but today you should be able to execute examples like that. So it's a simple cohort counts. And again, it sounds very simple, but a lot of questions that people ask today is, do you have patients like that? And if you do, then how many, right? So before you want to buy a data set from somebody else, you want to make sure that it does contain patients, at least that you're looking for. So that's actually a very common question that people ask in the beginning of study design feasibility analysis. Then they receive results, and you would be able to see results that, so basically, and Arachne works in the way that it takes a question and it sends this question to the organization, and then the data set owner can actually have an ability, they have an ability to review the question, approve it or reject, run it, it will run automatically, then they get a result back. They look at the result, making sure that there's nothing confidential is being shared, and approve it or reject it. So at the end of the day, what you see in this panel is the whole 9 yards, basically, from the beginning, what source code you submitted, to who approved, basically all of the approval logs, as well as the results of your execution. So then, of course, you get into more complicated type of analysis. One of them is cohort characterization. That's what people started talking about. That's where it gets a little bit more interesting. If previous example is just a simple SQL statement, well, actually, simple is a very relative word if you're talking about SQL coming from Atlas, right? It's pretty complex SQL. But in this specific case, you need to run more sophisticated type of analysis. So what we've done is we've created a way to package this analysis into a set of packrats. They're doing a better job than us screaming. So package this analysis into a self-contained module. Why is it important? Because you never know what versions of our environment might exist in somebody else's organization. So you want to make sure that you're consistently running the same code against the same consistent set of libraries so you can get consistent set of results back, right? So what we've done is we not only packaged that analysis into self-contained component, utilizing a technology called Packrat from an open source community as well, but we also, the secret sauce of Arachne is a data node and basically an execution engine. So when an organization becomes a part of the network, we work with this organization to install the component called data node and execution engine. And this organization will sit in that specific organization and will point to an OMOP CDM instance in that very specific organization. So if they would receive a query request from, let's say, Patrick, right? And they would be able, as I said before, review it, approve it or reject it, and then the execution engine will actually execute this code against OMOP CDM. But within the execution engine, there is a set of standard libraries that will be utilized to execute this R code. So meaning that if, let's say, Tufts, they have Arachne running, or Columbia, they have Arachne running, it's the same standard set of libraries that would be used to execute this code. So results are more comparable than if you would run different types of, let's say, R libraries and get some inconsistencies. Again, the same story as with counts, you get results back, but in this case, results are actually much more sophisticated. You can see graphs and characterization of that report on the right side. Oops, that was quick. Again, as I mentioned before, you can do the same with incident rates and even more sophisticated population level effect estimation or patient level prediction. He said PLE and PLE, PLP methods as well. So another thing that is also quite important, while we did try to make an idea of designing everything in Atlas and then importing this into Arachne, running in Arachne easier for people, because a lot of people do that, but we do have more sophisticated cases and more sophisticated researchers that would like to run their own custom code, right? So it's a very common use case. So, Martin, for example, runs, designs very complex studies. So we are able to support also custom codes as well. So obviously there's some rules that people need to follow when they run, when they code it, because you cannot hard code things. You cannot assume that a certain path would be available in a different organization, or a certain database name would be used, or a certain IP address would exist. Of course, you cannot do that. So you need to work through the templates. But we were able to support with very simple rules somebody else's code written in R or SQL, and be able to package it as well and execute it elsewhere. Again, so that's, how am I doing on time? Oh, great. So, so this is what Arachne looks like. That's a portfolio of studies that you will be able to see that is visible to that specific person. You will be able to, oops. There we go. So a list of studies, list of people within this community who you can invite to your study. A data catalogs, in this specific case, it's a demo site. It's a simple example. So here you'll see SynPub data, and you should be able to open the SynPub data and look at the properties of that specific data set, as well as look at the Achilles reports and see what's in this data. And apologies, connection is a little slow. And Insights library, where you would publish your results into. Here we go. So if you go into a study notebook, or study workbook, as we call it, you can find a study you're looking for. So, oops, in this specific case, apologies, I'm not used to this keyboard. I found a study that I prepared for this demo, so this is symposium. I can open this study, and I can see different study attributes, right? So again, I'm one of the leads, but I can see, you can attach documents to your study, of course, study designs, protocols, typical stuff. You can see participants in this study. You can see data sources that I added before to that study by clicking the button and sending a request to somebody else. You can see that I've created a number of analyses and pre-created some of them by going through that process. So if I create an analysis, I give it a title, specify a type of an analysis, right, which will enable me to, for example, to then to add code to this analysis by going through this, by doing it in multiple ways. So one way is I can just upload my custom code. Second way, I can import this custom code from a data node connected to this, through data node and Atlas that is connected to this data node sitting in somebody else's organization. So that going back to your question, how do you share designs? So if you do become part of a network, I actually would be able to ask you for a permission to use your data set, but you can also enable designs that might be available in your organization by linking Atlas to this data node as well. So, or I can just upload a file. So I can upload a JSON file from Atlas, or I can upload what Frank calls ADSQL file. So basically ADSI.SQL. It's a dialect that is supposed to be platform neutral, and then SQL renderer will translate it into a very specific dialect. So let's say if I do import, since I already got permissions to use certain data sets, I can now import cohort from Atlas instance that is connected to this data set. So in this specific case, I'm going against Atlas, OHDSI Atlas, right? So as you can see that there's a lot of designs that I can tap into, and so in this case, I'll look up my favorite ibuprofen and be able to add it by importing that data, that's very specific design into Arachne. So what Arachne is doing right now, since it's is a cohort, it will import ADSQL dialect. So this cohort, once it's imported, I can then submit for execution. Imagine that in this specific case, there could be data sets from Stanford, data sets from Columbia, data sets from IQVIA, elsewhere, basically, and I can select it to one or more data sets by just clicking the button like that. So another thing to realize that many organizations are actually quite conservative in their approaches, and they might not like a completely automated execution. Actually, that's a very common case in this specific case today. And so what we do for that reason, we have an ability to perform a manual execution. So we can mark this data set as manual, meaning that they agree to collaborate, but they don't want to automate things. And they should be able to come here, download the code, run it, and then upload results back. So that's another option to people to follow. So for that reason, that's what you see is we're not only bundling a SQL version of that cohort, right? So it's ADSQL, so it's platform neutral. But we're also bundling every variation of a database that we support today right here. So people, whatever they're running Impala or Redshift or Postgres, they can download it, find the dialect that they need to run, and execute it and get results back. And just for demo purposes, I marked one of the data sets as approval required. So that's the typical approval. See, execution pending. Why? Because this request was sent to a data set owner in that specific organization. Now he or she will receive a request similar to this right here, right? And be able to look at the code, see that there's nothing fishy going on, and if they're happy, they can click a button, approve, and it will change from pending to actually running status, right? Then they'll receive a response back, and again, it will be pending until the review this response and approve or reject it, and then people will get notifications back. And again, I just for demo purposes, again, I pre-created some of the results, but you can see we can do characterization, PLP, PLE, and incident rates, and even custom code. So I'll pause here. I know we have maybe a couple of minutes to go. Any questions to me so far? Please.
I just wanted to clarify my understanding that I could run this study on an instance of the, sorry. So I just wanted to clarify my understanding that I would be able to run this study on an Atlas instance of a data collaborator. That is one option. And if I have an approval. The second option is I just upload the study into Arachne and then wait for the approval from the data collaborator, and they would be running it on their end, and then provide the results for the study, the cohort. So I was interested to know, based on the results that I received, would I be able to upload those back into Atlas, which is sitting on my, at my organization, on my desktop, and do additional analysis in Atlas?
Okay, good question. So what's happening today, again, we're not running code on remote Atlas, which is actually our intention in the future. So we'd like to merge Atlas is a data node on a very specific organization. That's where we're going towards to, right? But today there's an execution engine that sits somewhere else, and this data node is connected to Atlas, but still is a separate component. So we send this code to that remote data node, and that's where execution happens, and we get aggregated results back into the central, I call the Arachne Central, where it's available to the whole team to review. We've been discussing actually quite a lot, and I think that's going to be in our roadmap that we'll discuss tomorrow, that at some point we need to create a shared repository of artifacts so that people can share artifacts, meaning it could be concept sets, pre-created concept sets, could be pre-created cohort definitions and things like that. So in this vision that we have, both Atlas and Arachne tools will be able to import those artifacts from the shared repository, community repository.
One important distinction, though, for all the analyses performed in the OHDSI ecosystem, we're reaching out to the patient level data to generate aggregate summary statistics. So we talk about like wanting to do more with those statistics. Basically, what you like to do is have access to the statistics so you can read them and potentially explore them. And that is something that we explicitly, like these objects could be imported into someone's environment. Whether or not they were using the Atlas user interface is kind of immaterial, but think of it as like, could someone, once you did a network study using Arachne, could you then say, hey, would you mind just letting me download your cohort characterization data object? Arachne would explicitly allow you to do that.
And I would be able to use that results schema and say run additional models.
Yeah, so like for example, like those, what Greg's showing there in terms of like analysis, like if we had the results, think of that as like a data file that you could then download and do whatever you wanted with. Whether that data file be like a CSV file of data, you know, like summary statistics, or it might be like a figure, like an image file that has the propensity score distribution plot,
So
or
for
anything
example,
like that.
like this one right here.
Like that's an artifact that you would actually get in Arachne, that you'd get from the site would generate it, put it up into Arachne, and then you would be able to view it and basically explore it. Question back here.
I know that the end goal is to get summary level results, but I'm curious about IRBs and informed consent, HIPAA authorization, and if there's a process to manage that through Arachne.
So today, it's a great question. I have actually, you know, one of the barriers that we all need to overcome is to, as Patrick saying all the time, guys, share your data, right? And it's easier said than done, because sharing data, you have to go through that process of, you know, getting this legal consent and legal form signed, and then getting Arachne installed and approved by, you know, internal IT folks. So again, I say, let's do it, guys. Let's share your data, and we'll go through that approval process when we get you on board of that network. Once you're in the network, you already have processes embedded so that you, as a data owner, as a guardian, would be able to receive requests and approve them, review them, approve them, or reject them. So there are mechanisms in place that you in control of what's running against your data. It's already in place. So the process of getting you into the network, I think it's outside of the technology domain. It's more of a legal process. And I don't know, Patrick. if you
Yeah,
wanna comment on that.
a core principle of the Odyssey community is everybody who has data has to be an appropriate steward of their data. So that means at your own institution, if you have some sort of governance board, whether that be an IRB or some sort of an ethics approval committee that you go through, that you need to do that for your process. What our network technologies are enabling is, assuming you go through the process and you are an appropriate steward of your data, this is a way for you to collaborate with others. We have done things within the community like sharing IRB templates that some organizations have proven successful in their organizations. So they've shared them with the community, say, you might want to try this in your organization. But explicitly as a community, we are not trying to tell people how to do governance. We are saying, do governance the way you need to do governance. And once you're through that process, let's figure out a way to answer clinical questions that matter. Any other questions? Okay. Great. All right, so
Thank you.
thank you, Greg. So, appreciate you all bearing with us as we work through the innovative technology here at the hotel. We will not do our last exercise because we are short on time that we worked through. But I did wish to provide a couple high-level comments and then open to the floor for comments or questions for any of the faculty. I know we threw an awful lot at you today, and some of it probably seemed overwhelming, and most of it probably seemed pretty confusing. But I just want to give a big picture, like why were you doing this tutorial in the first place? So as a community, we are here because we think that there can be value in us collaborating as a community to generate evidence that can improve healthcare and inform better decisions. The question is, how do we actually do that? Within the community, as you all will see tomorrow at the symposium, there's a lot of really exciting work that's going on in the community to do methodologic research that helps us to establish scientific best practices. There's a lot of cool clinical applications where individuals are answering research questions that actually matter. But what we realized is all the methodologic research in the world, in the earlier days when we were doing our OMOP experiments, we published tons of papers, and I'm not sure that they actually had that much impact in the world because methods papers just kind of go silent. What we realized is instead it's not about the science or the individual questions. It's about having a community that actually collaborates and works together to not just establish best practices, but actually apply those best practices to answering questions. And so the motivation for this tutorial is because what we've recognized is that there needs to be an ecosystem that exists that allows researchers to collaborate. And we saw a gap that it didn't really seem like it existed in the scale and scope that we thought was necessary. What you guys got exposure to today in terms of the tools, I have to say that I've been extraordinarily impressed with what the community has built. And I think it's been a game changer for my own personal research. But as cool as what we've got today, I feel like we're barely scratching the surface of where we're actually going to be. Odyssey's been around now for 3 or 4 years, and we've gone from an idea of wouldn't it be cool if a few people got together to now an entire tool suite that's allowing you to do clinical characterization, to satisfy that use case of just creating a cohort, all the way through characterizing and comparing cohorts, to doing treatment pathway studies across an international community. We're now doing incidence rates at a scale that allows us to do large-scale stratification. We're doing causal inference with population-level estimation and patient-level prediction, where we're learning, everybody else is just talking about deep learning, and Anthony showed you how you can click through 3 buttons and actually fit your own GAN yourself, which is extraordinarily remarkable. I'm excited about what you could do today, but I'm more excited about what we could do as a community if we all get together and say, you know what, I need an ecosystem, I need to be part of a community that works together, and I need to collaborate with others to make my data more accessible, to answer more questions that matter to more patients, to contribute where I can to the development and support of this ecosystem, and to be part of this community that actually believes that observational data can actually answer questions that matter to patients. And so the purpose of this tutorial is hopefully to excite some of you to continue on this journey with us, maybe to confuse a few of you so you'll go to the more advanced tutorials and learn more about how to actually do it. But probably more importantly than anything is to hopefully motivate you to buy into this mission about what we are trying to accomplish in the community, recognizing fully that there's a lot of people on board that are going to make this successful, but it's only going to be successful is if we grow this community and support each other towards this mission. So with that, I'd like to open it up to see if there's any questions or comments, any reactions to today or anything that anybody wants to talk about.
I have some follow-up questions for Gregory or for you guys. So that model is as an organization, if you want to play, there's no pay to play. You just offer a data node up with your own CDM sets. And is part of that, you mentioned an organization has to just be responsible for their own data governance. They have to be, my question is, do they have to commit to make sure those CDM sets are frozen in time so that the results of your studies are hold? So that's one. And the other is we acknowledge that some organizations are selfish with their data, but also, I suppose, with the results. So if you're a big pharma and you do want to participate, but then you run a study, but you want it in a space that's private. Is that possible in Arachne?
Actually, you brought up several core issues, and some of them are Arachne, but I would like to talk about it a little bit more broadly. So first and foremost, what does it take to do a study in the OHDSI community? Like, what does that actually take? Basically, somebody needs to say, I have a clinical question that I think matters, and someone else needs to say, I'd like to participate in that process. They're the OHDSI network studies. These are not funded studies. OHDSI is not providing money, and OHDSI is not receiving money. In fact, OHDSI is not really much of anything. Oh, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Kristen. So if you have an idea for a question that you think matters to patients, we encourage you to ask that question to the community. What that means is other people in the community, if they have a shared interest in your question, can say, I'd like to help you with that. And they could participate, and they could participate in many ways. As a researcher, I could help you with the design of your study. As a data holder, I could choose to execute the study and share the results. As just a clinician, I might be able to provide the insights to interpret the results and help you with writing a paper. There's lots of ways individuals can help with a study. Now, all of these tools that you just saw today are freely available in the public domain. If you want to be a selfish organization or individual and say, you know what, OHDSI kind of sounds kind of good, but what I really want is I just want to download this stuff and use it myself for my own research, you totally can do that. And we know some of, maybe not you in this room, but we know people in the community are absolutely doing that, and that's okay. We hope that by experiencing using these tools selfishly in your own environment for your own questions, that you'll eventually say, like, this is pretty cool. I bet you it would be even cooler if I actually collaborated, or I partnered, or I conducted network studies. But you absolutely can just download this stuff and use it by yourself. I'm personally most excited and motivated by the fact that each time I've done a study in my own organization for my own data set, just looking at one perspective, and then I've had the opportunity to do a network study, I've learned exponentially more information. When I get to collaborate with Chan at Aju and see what happens in Korea, I'm always learning something new. And I would never have that opportunity if it weren't for the OHDSI community and the tools that we're now collaborating with. That said, there are definitely the case that institutions, whether it be large pharma companies or regulators, have specific needs for funded research whereby they want to create a private network for some proprietary purpose. The OHDSI tools can absolutely be used for that purpose. It wouldn't be in the scope of OHDSI's work, but it can absolutely be that the OHDSI tools can support your private work. So a case in point would be OHDSI collaborators are collaborating with the FDA and with CBER for their network, but they have a regulatory statute. They can't just say all the things that they might be looking at on some public website that would be inappropriate. So there is a private network within the Odyssey community supporting CBER to do their work, but it is enabled by the exact same, a copy of these tools used to support their efforts. And we know that pharma companies are using tools like Arachne to create their own either internal network or proprietary network. And the tools support that behavior. I would just implore all of you to think about when you say you have to do something private or proprietary, just ask yourself the question, why? And think about how much better it would be for you and for the world if that weren't the case. Either?
I have a question for you guys. How many of you feel like you need help getting started? You can just hold it in your heart if you don't want to admit it out loud. But if you feel like coming to this tutorial is great, but you're kind of scared and don't know where to go, and I will be the first to admit, I love that we have gotten really detail-oriented on our website, but it might not be the easiest thing to navigate if you can't read our minds. If you need help getting started, you should consider all of the resources in this room as beacons to get you there, whether you find us afterwards or tomorrow or throughout the weekend. There are lots of great people that literally will hop on the phone with you at any hour and do WebExes just to try to make it work for your institution. So no request is too great or too small, but we hope it's bi-directional, that with the request comes an interest to continue your journey. But by all means, feel free to email me, and I will make sure you have my right email, since I have like 3 emails right now. But when people ask, why am I in the community? It's because I hear you in your little silos saying I need help, and I'm here to help make sure you get the help you need.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. For all of the cool technology and stuff that has been developed, and I think we do have cool technology, from my perspective, the single most important asset that we have is the community. It's the people working together on a shared mission towards helping each other out. And as you will experience, for those of you who are new and are experiencing the symposium for the first time tomorrow, you will see many dozen collaborators showcasing their work. All of them are interested in figuring out ways to collaborate with you. And there's all our collaborators around the world who are I have not experienced anybody in the community who's outright not wanting to help people. In fact, it seems like the thing that's brought everybody together is a recognition that we're all can be a lot more successful, efficient, and do higher quality science if we work together as a group rather than as separately.
Just a short question, really short question. Mailing list, you guys have a mailing list.
It's called Mora. No.
So if you are interested in all of this stuff, please go to forums.odyssey.org. That is our forum where all of the discussion threads take place. And anybody can ask any question. If you want to become a named Odyssey collaborator, it's super, super difficult. You go to the forums and say hi. That's what you got to do to become an Odyssey collaborator. Go to the forums and say hi, and we welcome you to our community.
And if you are free Tuesdays at 12 p.m. EST, you can also join the community call, or you can watch it. It gets recorded pretty much 99% of the time, unless we forget to hit record. But so here's the forums. If you go back, if you want to be part of the community meeting presentations every week, Mora updates this. You can see a really cool presentation that Ray Chen did that is a great example of how the network research is going. So more fun stuff here.
All right. I know it's towards the end of the day, but could I just get one super, super loud woo? Woo! All right. All right. Thank you guys very much for putting up with us. And I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow at the symposium.